Thought I'd take a little break here at Stockton Lake. Been out riding all day, having a good time. I had a viewer ask if I could give him my thoughts on the difference between the Buells and the XR. So it's like, here goes. I have rode them both back to back here recently, so it's pretty easy to do. Number one, you can't go wrong with either one. They're both fun bikes to ride. So I would take either one. The reason I got this, it just kind of edges the Buells out in the fun factor for me, and that's very subjective. But I didn't really like the XR the first few miles I rode it, and then I took it out on a back road, got it in some curves, and it's just like, for a big bike, this thing handles really nice. Just makes me want to lean it over and drag a knee, slide off the seat. It's nice. And I suppose the fun factor, you know, it could wear off after a while, but right now, I do like it better than the Buells for the fun factor. And there have been some bikes that I have bought that I was like, by the time I rode it home, I was like, what the crap did I do now? I don't even like this bike. This one, every time I get on it, I just want to ride it more. So I think it's gonna keep my interest. It's got lots of stuff that I can modify on it to improve. But what got me into the Buells originally is I've had 3 Buells so far. I've had a Lightning Long was the first one, then I bought the Lightning Low, and then I got the Firebolt. And the thing that got me into the Buells to start with was their cheap price, because I'm kind of cheap to start with. But they're generally low priced, and I picked one up, and what has kept me riding them, what has made me like this one, is this right here. This big old antique air-cooled lump of an engine, which that surprises me as much as anybody. Because I used to have a shirt that had a picture of a Harley on the bottom of the lake with a line going up to a boat. They were using it as an anchor, and it said function before form. Well, you know, some of the Harleys, you know, maybe, but this one, I like the motor. I like everything it does. It's got good torque. It's got great sound. It just speaks to my soul. So I like the motors. That's what keeps me riding this kind of bike. I've had lots of inline 4s. Don't really care for them. I've tried parallel twins. Don't care for them. The only thing that has been close to this has been a 3-cylinder speed triple, an old Triumph, a 2000 model 955. That one was a great engine. I liked it too. But these I like even better. Now you look on paper, and these, you know, the Buell looks a lot better on paper. I mean, they're lighter, you got better geometry, because this is a pretty heavy pig. It's about 150 pounds heavier than the Lightning Low. But you don't notice it once you get out on the road. The only time I notice it is pushing it around in the garage. As soon as this thing gets moving, it feels great. They've all got good brakes, good suspension. So, not a big issue there. Basically, there was 3 things that made me get this and sell the Buells. Was number one is just the feel of riding it, the fun factor of riding it. This one edges out the Buells a little bit, especially the Firebolt. I bought the Firebolt last, and it was my least favorite just because of its riding position. I mean, it's a sporty bike. You gotta lean forward over the tank, and I've never really liked that kind of riding position. I like more of a dirt bike, upright setting. So I basically bought it because it looked good, and it does look good. And I like looking at it. Every time I look out in the garage, or I watch that video where I did the exhaust comparisons, like, the Buells are beautiful. I love the way they look. But again, I don't want to have a bike just so I can look at it every time I open the garage door. I like to ride them. And I just like this riding position better. So, the fun factor is number one. Second thing is, the hell was the second thing? The second thing is just the visual. the look of the bike. Well, I think the Buells look beautiful. The engine is what draws me to these bikes, and in the Buell, you can't see the engine. I mean, you can see about here down. The big cylinders are all covered up. They're stuffed up in the frame, and that causes maintenance issues, which we'll get to in part 3, or issue 3. But I like being able to see the motor. It's out in the open. You can see all of it. You can polish it, whatever you want to do, but you can see the motor. And I just think the whole bike works. The reason I was a little skeptical about getting this one is sometimes when this is the kind of bike that sometimes in pictures it doesn't look as good as it does in real life. And you look at some pictures, I'm like, It's like, but you know, up close, real life, you change it around a little bit, it looks great. And you can see the motor. I actually saw one of these the first time, back when they first came out. They had one sitting in a Walmart. I don't know if they were raffling it. I don't remember why it was in a Walmart. Walking down the aisle in the Walmart, and here's this Harley sitting there, and it was the same kind as this, the orange. And I looked it over, and it's like, now that is a Harley I would ride. And then really never thought anything about it after that, because I'm not going to buy a new one, which I probably should have bought a new one and just rode it all these years, but I didn't. And then, a year or so ago, Paige was working at the Harley dealer in Lebanon, and they have another shop in Osage Beach, and we were at the Osage Beach shop, and the owner's son has one of these XRs, and he had it all tricked out. It's absolutely beautiful. So she took me back in the back room, showed me the bike, and I was just like, wow, I may have to get one of these. And I looked around, and they are considerably more expensive than the Buells, because I basically sold both Buells to pay for this one. And I actually made some money on both Buells. But purchase price is not that big a deal. It's still not that expensive. But I got to thinking about them, and then a buddy of mine was wanting a smaller bike because he's got a big touring Harley. Told him about these. He ended up buying this. He put the X model suspension, did some other work on it, and then ended up wanting to sell it. So there was my chance. I picked it up. Like I said, I was kind of iffy on it till I got out on the back road and rode it, and just absolutely loved it. Now, number 3 is maintenance. And anything on a Buell short of like changing the oil and the air filter is a pain in the ass. I mean, there's no way around it. And for me, that's not a deal breaker for me, because I do my own wrenching. It's annoying, the kind of stuff you have to do on the Buells, because even getting to the spark plugs, I mean, I can reach back here, touch both spark plugs. On the Buell, it's like down in a hole. It's hard to get to. It's quite the exercise to get the spark plugs changed on a Buell. So being able to work on this, having it out in the open, is a big plus. I changed this rocker box. Well, I pulled the head off and changed the head gasket, so everything from there up was changed, and it was so easy because everything you can get to. The Buells have a bad habit of the back rocker box cover leaking because it gets so hot up in that frame. And you have to disassemble the whole front of the motor, everything basically that attaches to the motor. You have to rotate the motor down out of the frame just to be able to get this cover off. It's quite the big deal to change that cover, and they leak fairly frequently because of the heat. And then there's also the fan that you have on the Buells, which gets coated with the oil, so you have to change those. But just having it all out in the open is nice. It's very handy. Some other things like, say you needed to change the fuel pump on the Buell. Well, the fuel pump is right here under this cover. And you take the tank off, which is a piece of cake. Take 3 screws out. 1, 2, 3, I think 3. There may be 4. Take them out. You can get the fuel pump out. On the Buell, since the fuel is in its perimeter aluminum frame, the fuel pump is stuck up in the back edge of one of the legs of that frame, And you have to take the entire swing arm off of the back of the bike, back tire, swing arm, everything to get to it. And then you need a special puller, which you can just build that out of scrap metal, to pull that pump out to change it. And of course, your swing arm on the Buell holds your oil, so you've got to deal with oil lines and everything to take that off. It's not something you have to do all the time, but the filter is in there. Sometimes the fuel pumps go bad. It's a lot of work to change. Not so on this. Another issue, I do like the addition. The engines are pretty much the same. There's some external differences on them, but basically it's a 1200 Sportster motor. The deal with this one is they added some extra oil lines and oil chambers in the head to run oil around the exhaust port. And then they added, it's got a bigger cooler than what the Buells run. And that extra oil helps cool the cylinders down, which that's a nice touch that they put on these that the Buells don't have. Like I said, the Buells get hot. The other thing that always has been an issue with the Buells is their front brakes. These brakes on this are conventional brakes. They're non-floating rotors on these older models. I'm upgrading to EBC floating rotors just because I like the look better. These still work fine, but I like the look. But the problem is with the Buells, I have had 3 Buells, 2 out of 3 have had brake problems, and serious brake problems. They have a section of them that's a different thickness on the rotor, and it shakes when you use the front brake. Very, very irritating. And I guess when you consider the other used rotor I bought to fix the Firebolt, that's 3 out of 4 that weren't any good. So you got to consider that. But the rotor on, they use that perimeter rotor, and it's been an issue on all of them. That was actually one of the reasons I sold the Lightning Long I had first, because I didn't like the brakes. They pulsed, it was irritating. So I don't know if it's a quality issue with the original brake manufacturers. I know like the wheels on the Buells are made in China, so I don't know if that's where they made the brake rotors or not. But I put an EBC on the Firebolt, fixed it right up. It may never have another issue, but how much longer are you going to be able to get rotors for it? Who knows? The parts are a problem. Now, that's another thing. Some of the parts for the Buells are getting harder to get. One in particular is the front engine mount. Where this one uses a rubber mount down here, the Buells use one up front, and it doesn't have much rubber in it. It mounts on there, the bolt comes up through this mount, got a little ring of rubber, and then the mount, and it moves up and down. Well, it tends to rip the rubber out of the mounts. I've never had that problem, but a lot of people have. Then the motor drops down to where it's setting on the retainer bolt head, and you just need, the cure is just put a new mount in it. Problem is you can't always get the front mounts. Harley makes a run of them occasionally, so they'll be available, no problem. And then when that runs out, it may be 6 months to a year before they make another run of them, and you may not be able to get a mount. So that's one thing to consider. Last thing, if you're considering a Buell, like I've said, they're more difficult to work on. And the problem that some people have, like me, I can work on it, do anything that needs to be done to it. So that's not an issue for me. But if you buy a Buell with the thought of just, I don't care how hard it is to work on, I'll pay somebody else to do it, you may not be able to find anybody else to do it. The guy that I bought the Firebolt from lives up in Kansas City. Harley dealers all over the place. And he's the original owner of the bike. Didn't even really want to sell it. He couldn't find anybody to work on it. And he's the kind of guy that absolutely, he said he couldn't run a crescent wrench. So I'm surprised he even knew what a crescent wrench was. But you can't always find somebody that's willing to work on it. The Harley dealers don't want to do it because everything on the Buell takes more time, and time is money in the shop. So if you can work on it yourself, not a problem. If you've got to pay somebody, you may not be able to find anybody to pay. Because he was actually, as soon as he found out I could work on him, he wasn't wanting to sell me the bike. He was wanting to hire me to work on it. It's like, I probably should have just done that. But I ended up buying it. But that's it. Really, they're all good bikes. This one edges out the Buells a little bit. I like to be able to see the engine. And it's a blast to ride. But if these weren't available, I'd still be riding my Buells all day long. I hope that helps if you're trying to decide which bike to buy. But yeah, I'm really happy with this bike. And like I said, this one does have the X model suspension. So if you get one of the older ones, the suspension will not be fully adjustable. This now has a reservoir shocks on the back, fully adjustable forks, fully adjustable shocks. You can buy all that stuff and upgrade the older bikes, or if you can find an X model for sale, they come with it already on there. So, but it's just absolutely a blast to ride. It's a blast to cruise on. It's a blast to run through the corners hard. It just does everything pretty well. It's like some other bikes, it doesn't do anything, the best. It doesn't do anything excellently, but it does everything pretty dang good. So it's the kind of bike I like. I'm going to rock this for quite a while. Hopefully this is a forever keeper. We'll see. I'm going to get back on the road. Finally glad the sun came out. It was a little cold earlier this morning.